The New York Football Giants fall at home to the Detroit Lions in a somewhat embarrassing loss, 31-18. We break it down from a high level. What did not go well in this one? Is it a concern going forward? And how key injuries could impact the Giants' playoff push? Yes, friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, we are your hosts over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast. My boy, Doug Norrie. And yonder there, it is the healthy, the wealthy, the wise, the seasoned generational ticket holder and global perspective at the moment, Mr. Andrew Makowitz.
Listen, I know we're going to talk about the Giants game yesterday, but especially because they lost, today is all about the U.S. men's national team, soccer. If you have some pride in your country, I suggest 2 p.m. today, get in front of the TV, yell and scream, and march our boys to victory, Adam.
You better believe it, man. I don't know if we've really talked about it. It's probably come up a couple of times over the course of the podcast, but I mean, Andy played soccer all the way up at the college level at Syracuse. I played through high school. Like, it's been a part of both of our families in big ways. So soccer, it's a big thing, man. So hopefully OGP fans are also worldly traveled fans who appreciate, the beautiful game that is soccer. Indeed. As we refer to it here. That being the case, though, we won't spend too much time on it, but 2 p.m. USA, I'm going to be getting myself a little bit locked in there. The thing that we were locked into on Sunday was the New York Football Giants taking on the Detroit Lions, and there's a few different levels to hit this from. There's a lot of injuries that come out of this. We know there's a short week coming up taking on the Dallas Cowboys on Thanksgiving, but I hate to have been right. I said this in the preview show for this game. Like, I don't want to be right about this, but I saw a loss coming. Now, I said 24-21 Detroit. I thought it was going to be a little bit more of a back and forth battle. This one kind of got away from Big Blue early. They didn't quite have their offensive rhythm. And there's some things that I think Detroit just flat out did well. But we came into it, Andy, saying these were 2 must-win games. At home against Houston, at home against Detroit. Where's your disappointment level on this one?
Yeah, it's pretty high. It also because, Adam, it did get away from the Giants, but let's keep in mind the Giants were up 6-3. Right? Yeah. Like, they scored the touchdown. They righted the ship after the Lions get the field goal. Obviously, Graham Gano, tough day. He had 4 IVs put in just to be able to get out there. Misses 2 extra points. He's like, I should have just stayed home. Like, you could just tell Gano was like, I shouldn't even be out there. Yeah. But the Giants early on looked like
I shouldn't have been out there in my fantasy league either. But hey.
Well, we'll talk about that later. The issue for the Giants was that they just could not get anything going on the ground early. And we know that the Giants have established the run. They're one of the top rushing teams in the NFL. And seeing Saquon Barkley get out there, his longest carry was for 4 yards the entire day. He had 15 carries for 22 total yards. And it felt like this was going to be the game that we're going to have to rely on Daniel Jones even more. Everyone's been clamoring for him to throw the ball 40 times to see what it looks like. And we saw a little bit of a mixed bag from that.
Yeah, and I think, at the highest level here, too, as we welcome everybody in over on YouTube, I had a chuckle because Marty was beat to the first comment punch there, but also some birthdays coming up later this week, which actually I do as well, my friends. But you mentioned it there. I think it's interesting that we the ability for Detroit, they made the active choice. We talked about this a number of times over the course of this season. Why aren't more defenses just stacking the box? Why aren't they putting all of their resources in stopping Saquon Barkley? Now, the elements of the stadium, that may have played a factor. We're going to talk about some injuries here that obviously played a factor in this game. But I think if you're another team, you go, let's shut down Saquon first, right? And then we'll live with the results. And even though Daniel Jones was using his legs a little bit in this one more effectively, and just really with a more concerted effort, obviously, than the last couple of weeks, I think if you're an opposing defense, you go, okay, we'll live with it. If you think about the number of times that Daniel Jones can use his legs and what is the risk reward defensively of it being an explosive 50-yard run versus, okay, he picked up the first down. Saquon Barkley, on the other hand, we know he's a home run hitter. So it felt like Detroit made a very conscious decision to say, yes, take Saquon out of the game. We'll live with the rest of the results. And more than anything, because it wasn't a disastrous game for the Giants offensively, but more than anything, it's just let's force the Giants to do something more that they haven't been doing a lot of this season, right? And that can just throw a team off. And I think that that's the biggest part of it when you have to rely on a different element of your offense with more consistency than you would like to. It throws off your game script, it throws off your timing, and then even though stats look good, the scoreboard doesn't.
Yeah, and getting Saquon going would have been the most important thing. It keeps down time of possession for a team that's top 10 in both passing and rushing in the Detroit Lions.
Yep.
It was tough to keep them off the field. On the other side of things, Adam, on the defensive side of the ball, the Giants just could not stop the run. And because they could not stop the run, it allowed Jared Goff to be able to make easy completions to wide open players at different points. The Giants were made one-dimensional by by the Lions' ability to stop him from being able to move the ball with any consistency. The Giants struggled on the other side of the ball, and Jamal Williams ends up with 3 touchdowns. The Giants just could not stop the rushing attack of the Lions.
Yeah, you talk about it there. When we look inside of that running room, right? Jackson goes off for 66, Williams for 64, and the 3 touchdowns. Swift, who did not have a good game, by the way, and almost tried to get the Giants back into it. 20 rushing yards for himself as well, though. 160 total. And I think, too, again, like this is the high level moment here. We're going to talk about the injuries. We all get that. And I'm going to give you a reason why you can't just go ahead and hang your hat on that as being the reason for the loss. But the Giants have been gashed in the running game defensively throughout this season, right? So on a highest possible level, this just felt like, to me, as I said coming in, the Giants were 7-2 entering this game. A lot of good wins. We know they've all been one-possession games, but I think that you see how razor-thin the margins are on victories here for the New York Football Giants, no matter who the competition is. And by the way, that makes 3 straight for Detroit. Like we're all, we all use them as the punching bag and the laughing running joke of the NFL. They're at least a competitive team, and the defense hasn't been great for them, but their offense can do that. Put up 31 points, and the other big point that I came into this one that I thought was really important to bring up before we talk about just some of the disastrous injuries and a very upsetting decision made by the New York Giants coaching staff. This was not a good game, by the way, for the coaching staff, in my opinion.
No, it was not. No, it was not.
However, remember, I said coming in, the Giants had gotten multiple turnovers 3 consecutive weeks leading into this game. No turnovers in this one. Again, another razor-thin margin. You already don't usually win a lot of games when you lose the turnover battle. That's actually a really dependent on component of what this defense has been doing successfully. You take those off the board. Swift had the fumble, but Detroit recovered it. And just like that, instead of switching field position, instead of giving the offense easy opportunities to get extra points on the board, you don't. And then this one gets away from you in the first half. And to me, I know we were texting, man. And we said, hey, maybe this drive here, if they can. But it's like when you have that sense of a game, right? Coming out of halftime, I don't see it. I just don't see it happening today.
Well, think of it this way. Daniel Jones throws his first interception where kudos to Aiden Hutchinson. He drops back. There's only a handful of defensive ends that can make that play where you drop back into zone coverage and Daniel Jones just doesn't see him, thinks he has a wide open crossing route pass. It picked off. Great play by the defensive player. Daniel Jones does have to have the awareness to be able to see him drop out of coverage by not seeing the pressure coming at him on the side. But that really was like the catalyst where the Detroit Lions go down the field, score, Giants 3-and-out, punt, Detroit Lions score right before halftime. It felt like all the momentum was with the Lions, and that's really where it kind of fell flat for the Giants.
Yeah, let's talk about Daniel Jones here for a second because, again, obviously, he's going to be the lightning rod. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. You mentioned that interception there. When you watch it in real time, I mean, like I say, you don't want to see him throw that interception. Hutchinson did that to Aaron Rodgers, I think, a couple of weeks prior. Same exact play. The interesting thing, and this is, I'm neither condemning Daniel Jones excessively, nor am I giving him the excuse. But when you watch the replay, it's like the offense and defensive linemen just perfectly move right as Slayton is making that crossing route and as Hutchinson drops back. And it's a smart play from Hutchinson. He kind of hides himself, leans back, and then to your point, makes a very athletic play for a man at that position. But all the timing of it really was the perfect storm of, there's just no world that he's going to know that Hutchinson is dropping back there. Now, we can discuss whether or not you should have a sense, hey, if Hutchinson's not on your back, then he's probably somewhere else. but it was a real confluence. Could have been a linebacker, could have been anything, right? Again, it's not a good interception, and no interception is good per se. But to your point, I just think timely plays from this Detroit Lions defense that really is short field there, right? And then you go in, you give up the extra score, and you can start to feel that unraveling nature of this.
Okay, so we'll stick on Daniel Jones, and then I have where I think the real issues were in this game. But Daniel Jones, I don't think was the main reason they lost this game. I don't think he was also the reason why they were like, in the middle of it. What I will say is this: Daniel Jones, 340 passing yards. People wanted to see him throw for over 175 yards. Guess what? It happened. He threw for 340, almost doubled that. He also ran effectively, as you mentioned, had 50 yards on the ground. The guy had almost 400 yards of total offense, right? The second interception was on 4th down. You got to make a play. You have to throw the ball at that point. You cannot take a sack. Better to throw it up and make it a punt than anything else. He played okay. You saw flashes. The back shoulder throw at 3rd and 15 to Darius Slayton was awesome. He was making the right throws. I don't necessarily think it was on Daniel Jones in this game. However, he could have played better than he did, right?
Yeah. And I think, 39 QBR. So if we're all things being taken into consideration, it wasn't a good game for him. To your point, if you said, give me your top 3 reasons why the Giants lost this game, Daniel Jones isn't going to make that list. I think the disappointing part is, and this is the, not even with him. I'll save my overall stance on this. It's disappointing from a Daniel Jones standpoint just to want this game like this with 340 passing yards, with the rushing yards. You want this to be the game, win or lose, that he throws 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, and they play a tight one and a close loss.
Okay, so you talked about the top reasons why the Giants lost. I'm just going to go on a quick diatribe for you, Adam, to explain why the Giants lost. The first thing I will say is we talk about how the margins are razor thin for the Giants, right? Like they're winning on making the right coaching play, making the smart decision, getting the right turnover at the right time. Here's where it all went wrong for the Giants. And tell me if the Giants have enough talent to overcome this. They missed 2 extra points. They threw 2 interceptions. They fumbled the ball in their own territory and the other team recovered. They lost the turnover battle. The coaching staff did not call a very good game at all. The Giants defense played undisciplined football. O'Shane Ximenez getting a 15-yard rough in the passer penalty on a 3rd down, which would have given the ball back to the Giants. The Giants' run defense was not very good. Our top 2 cornerbacks got hurt in the middle of the game. One, going back to the coaching staff, inexplicably put our number 1 cornerback out on punt returns, which caused a sprained MCL injury. When you think about all of those things in its totality, the Giants are not talented enough to overcome half of those things, let alone all of them happening in one game.
100%. And just because we're going to talk injuries for the Giants, and that impacted, of course, the offensive line as well. Just on the injury front, though, Okudah went out for the Detroit Lions. They had an offensive lineman go out as well. It's just one of those things where, again, injuries do happen. Now, game to game and season long injuries are a very big theme. But I do look at that, and again, if Adoree Jackson's out there, do we feel better about it? Sure. But let's just be honest. When Adoree Jackson was out there, Detroit was still moving the football, right? So I think that's that chicken or egg thing, or the, hey, because this player got hurt, we can now look at that as being a reason. I think the Giants were doing more than enough to themselves, inflicting, self-inflicted wounds. They didn't even need Detroit, to have that extra opportunity to have success. And just that being the case too, on the Adoree Jackson punt returning. You and I texted about this. I'm not going to overstate that I was disgusted with it. I feel like we did mention not loving putting a thin room and putting that position. I think we did say that coming into this game because he was getting those reps in practice. I find it weird. I just find it weird. It weird across the board that Gary Brightwell returns kicks, but he can't return punts. And then even if that's the case, because I know it's a different setup, I understand that. However, as you and I text, I'll take one of 2 other options. Either anybody else that is not number 1 on your depth chart, that's number 1, or don't put anybody back there and just, eat it, whatever it is, or fair catch every single time. Because again, they talk about coaching. This is a decision that you made. I get everybody wants to be all in. Everybody wants to serve whatever role is going to help the team. But guess what? Adoree Jackson, your role is to be the number 1 cornerback. And even though it looks like he wasn't necessarily in the postgame, not as concerning there, we can turn attention to other injuries here. But it's just, It's brutal, man. There's got to be somebody else. There has to be somebody else capable of doing that, including Richie James, who I know who had his issues, but he's still on the roster. And if you're on the roster and your first function was being a punt returner, I don't care. I'm going to put out Richie James and say, fair catch every ball, because his fumble issues were after the catch and running with it. Fair catch every ball, buddy. We're not putting Adoree Jackson back there.
Well, the egregious part about it, which it's silly to put your number one cornerback back there when you're razor thin at that position anyway. We talk about the thin margins the Giants live within. Yep. But like, also the risk reward wasn't that high for what they were trying to do.
Right, what's Adoree doing? Is Adoree a burner of a returner that you just don't put out there because he's your number one? No.
Well, to your point, he was electric in college at USC returning punts, but that's college. He's going against dentists and doctors. Like that clearly it doesn't really manifest itself to where we are now, right? But the other piece of it, Adam,
is my chiropractor in college for now.
But like yeah, I mean, Uber driver is picking you up. Like that's who was punting the ball. It's just silly. But like when you think about the upside that was presented here, there were over 500 punts going into this week in the NFL. You know how many had been returned for a touchdown? Zero. Zero punts had been returned for a touchdown. Punting has become this thing where it's like, just don't turn the ball over. Don't let it go over your head. Just get the ball back in possession. The touchdown that the New England Patriots had against the Jets was the first punt return of the season for a touchdown. So when you think about the risk reward, like it's just not there for an extra 5 yards. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Did we check the timing on that? Because it basically, do you think from a football karma standpoint, it was going to be one or the other? Either you're going to get a punt return touchdown or you're going to get injured. And it was a flip of the coin. Whoever touches the ball first, and New England happened to get their hands on it. We'll have to check the tape on that.
New England ended up scoring that touchdown with 8 seconds to go in the game. Adoree Jackson got hurt earlier. So,
smart by the Patriots. They waited for their opportunity. They let that karma play itself out. Yes, so there's a frustration there. Again, let's not bludgeon it. It looked like I'm trying to check double check the reports here as far as where we stand on a lot of these injuries. Try to check that, pull them up in the background if you can, Andy, while I just mentioned the list that we're going to go over here, which is offensive line-wise, they came into this game, they started with Shane Lemieux. He doesn't get injured. They just switched to Azuda, not ready to get out there and play. Again, from a coaching standpoint, in the postgame, I watched a little bit of it with Dable where he said, yeah, we thought that was the best chance, but then we decided that the best chance in the second half was Azuda. And we've been a proponent. We're a fan of Shane Lemieux. I think two things are at play here. One, you drafted Azuda, so you like him, obviously. He was a higher draft pick even just by comparison. But I don't understand how you lead up to this game in the week of practice and your decision is to start Shane Lemieux, and then halfway through you go, yeah, you know what? He's just not ready yet. Like, that's a mistake. You can wait the extra, play him on Thursday against Dallas or play him the following week. Like, understanding you've had injuries across the offensive line, but I do not get this idea that you didn't realize that he wasn't ready to go until you saw him in the game having several mistakes on big key plays.
Well, so I think, honestly, the coaching staff was like, we thought he was better than more prepared than he was. We saw him in practice getting reps. They didn't see what it was going to be like on the field. He was a literal turnstile, Adam. It was very, very bad. And the problem is playing guard at that position, literally pressure was right into Daniel Jones's face or Saquon Barkley trying to run the ball. He was getting contacted a yard or two in the backfield because we were getting no push on the offensive line. I mean, that was another catalyst as to why Saquon in the run game couldn't get going, was that it was a disaster from a run blocking perspective for the offensive line.
I know, yeah, and I mean, and again, I'm looking at Mike Kafka. Like, I get it, man. Things happen, but Mr. Innovation, how do you find ways to do it? Now, just think across that offensive line here quickly. Phillips is starting this one at right tackle. He ends up having an issue. Little taste of little Matt Pert in the building. You also had Feliciano, so then Nick Gates comes in at the center position. So you have all these things rotating through. By and large, the pass protection actually held up okay, which is, of course, would be shocking, right? It has to be the case. Whereas the running game really struggled here. And then further compounding it was you started 100 receiving yards for Wan'Dale Robinson, using him in different ways, getting dynamic. Matt Breida involved in the offensive a little bit more here too. And I do wonder. So on Wan'Dale Robinson, it's disappointing because he has the injury and maybe that takes away an explosive element in this game. On the Matt Breida side of it, because I'm going back here to look at his box score, I thought that he was pretty darn effective in this one, and maybe there was an opportunity. He ends up having what? Just 3 carries for 13 yards, gets the touchdown. He only has 1 catch for 16 yards. Like, I just thought, boy, we always applaud the Giants for being so good at those in-game adjustments. It just felt like, hey, they are making all of their attention is actively going at Saquon Barkley. Let's do different things. Use the other players. It doesn't mean, listen, your best option is going to be Saquon. But in a game where they're shutting him down, go to the other thing and just see if you can have some success.
Well, you mentioned the game plan. It felt frustrating that the Giants were just running the ball up the middle on first down quite often. It was like, 75, 80% of the first down plays from Kafka were running the football. When we saw that it was clearly ineffective for the first 4 possessions, you got to try to get a little bit more creative there. The tough part for me, Adam, you mentioned some of the injuries. So we talked about Adoree Jackson. Sounds like it's a sprained MCL, could be anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks. It seemed like everyone was saying he dodged a major injury, which is a positive for the Giants. Outside of that, I mean, you have Fabian Moreau had a rib injury. Jason Pinnock had a jaw injury. He ended up...
He went down early in the game and then went down again.
He walked off the field, went right past the locker room. There was an ambulance waiting for him, hopped in the ambulance room right to the hospital to get his jaw checked on. So, he's injured. You talked about John Feliciano's neck. Tyree Phillips was already the second string right tackle, backing up Evan Neal, who's out. He goes out with a neck injury as well. So, to be honest with you, it was not 100% the reason why the Giants lost. But when you look potentially, and we'll do this in a minute, looking forward to the Cowboys game, the Giants are going to be starting 50% of their starters are going to be guys that were not on a roster in week 1, which is a scary, scary thought to have.
Okay, so the one thing I do just want to note, because this is a nice historical reference point that you and I grew up watching. Obviously, Saigai mentioned in our live chat, if anyone that remembers when Jason Sehorn lobbied and pushed, I want to be a return. And then his career was never the same, right? These are the risks that you run when you put incredibly valuable defensive pieces into those types of roles. It's just you're elevating the risk of injury and potentially derailing what could be a really positive season. That being the case, you said looking forward here. So let's do the big picture here first before we talk about this short week and playing Dallas, who got right back on track against Minnesota here coming up on Thanksgiving. To me, and you mentioned it, all of the guys that 50% of the guys that'll start on Thursday will be guys that weren't on the roster. Okay. The thing that I'm going to remind everybody is we have heralded Joe Schoen for going out and finding pieces and building up this roster, right? And we're disappointed to be losing a Moreau. And I mean, listen, Xavier McKinney is obviously a big piece, and obviously Adoree Jackson is, right? There's no two ways about it. And also, this is my friendly reminder to the fan base. The reason why I don't overreact to this loss and why I don't overreact to even Daniel Jones having a not so great game, and why I wasn't overreacting to what feels like good games from him over the first 6, 7, 8 weeks by and large, is because this is still a rebuilding team. And some of the moves that were made throughout the season were injury related. Most of them were talent based. Most of them were about, we still need to be a better roster, right? Once upon a time, David Sills was someone we dreamed on. 2, 3, 4 other wide receivers later, now it's Isaiah Hodgins, who, wouldn't you know it, as high as we are, I mean, we all drink the Kool-Aid game to game, turn around, he drops some passes. Why? Because he is not a high-level draft pick. He's not a high-performing player. He may get there. He can be a contributor, but the reality is they needed more wide receiver help coming into the season. They were going to have razor-thin margins on the offensive line and young players working there as well. The secondary was still thin coming in. We all liked the idea of Aaron Robinson, but let's all be honest. Before he had the injuries and went down for the season, he didn't look so good. The linebacking core, we dreamed on Darian Beavers being in there. But guess what? Beyond him, there wasn't a lot of people that we were excited about. We said Tay Crowder has performed admirably, but at the same time, we understood you don't want him being the guy getting the majority of the reps. Micah McFadden, a rookie, had a terrible game yesterday. Might have been the worst player on the team yesterday for the Giants, and that's okay. He's a rookie. But that's what we're talking about here, man. 65% of this roster, 70% of this roster might not even be here next year. So it's like I get the idea of, man, they've had a lot of injuries this year, and I think the record makes you dream on, boy, if they'd been healthy. There's still so many spots on this roster that we're going to need to be improved. And it's not to take away what's been an exciting and great season, but this is why I've tried to, and I've had a hard time doing it, temper expectations around what to expect from this season. And now coming up with all these injuries, starting on Thursday night on a short week against Dallas, becomes a big 4 out of 5 games against the division. This is going to be a really hard run. And I think Giants fans just might need to prepare themselves for a really hard run here through the holiday season.
It can be very difficult. To your point, Adam, we do need to improve this roster, but seeing the Giants go 7-3 with an injured roster makes you think that there is promise. Like, if we did get players and we did have something, we're building towards the right direction.
Of course.
And so it feels like soul crushing when injury after injury, we're just stripping parts away from what we're trying to build up. It's like,
100%.
I won't go ad nauseum, but I'll just give you a couple. It's like, you start with Colin Johnson in the preseason. Like, he looks like he could emerge as a wide receiver for this team. He suffers an ACL injury. He's out for the year. We never get to see any of these guys that they're trying to build and develop. Obviously, Sterling Shepard goes out with a knee injury. You have Adoree Jackson, Wan'Dale Robinson, randomly off on the sideline. Looks like his foot plants into this stupid turf at MetLife Stadium. It looks like he has,
which they did announce they are going to change. They will be changing it
from one synthetic turf to another synthetic turf. It's like, let's put lipstick on a pig. That's great.
We're not going to solve the problem, but we are going to do something different.
It is frustrating for Giant fans to know that this team has overperformed from a coaching perspective, and whatever talent's been out there playing hard, working hard. They've outperformed what their record probably could or should be, and they're now 7-3 with an opportunity to make the playoffs. You mentioned how difficult this upcoming slate is. You have the Cowboys one more time. You've got the Commanders twice. You've got the Eagles twice. You have the Vikings and the Colts. That is not a very easy road for the Giants, considering the Colts look like they're ultra competitive. The Eagles are rolling right now at 9-1. You got 2 games against them. The Cowboys just blew the Vikings out 40-3. And the Commanders now with Taylor Heineke look like they are a competent team. It is going to be difficult. This Thursday game for the Giants does not set up well when the Cowboys are coming off a pretty easy game where they could rest their starters in the third and fourth quarter. The Giants are going to be battling injuries just to get healthy players on the field. It will be tough, but guess what? That's why we play the games, and you got to go out there and you got to compete, and who knows what can happen.
Yeah, sorry, just to put that in the right context, I said 4 out of 5. It's 4 straight against the division, and then what will amount to 5 out of their final 7 games, because they'll go at Dallas, home for Washington and Philly, on the road for Washington, and then out to Minnesota, home for the Colts, and finishing the season at the Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah, and by the way, it's like just compounding this is also that everyone else in the division won. Right? Like that became a real problem in this one, because now when you look inside the division, it's 9-7, 7-6 in terms of the win totals. And then even other teams, just when you talk about the Minnesota Vikings, they don't matter there necessarily, but you are just looking around. I don't think you have any other real concerns here. But when we talked about, as San Francisco also won, so there's at least a team sniffing there at getting into that third wild card conversation. Like, this is exactly what you didn't want. And it's why, again, back at the top, man, we talked about it coming out of the bye week and that disappointing loss to Seattle. Hey, listen, they're having a good year. West Coast, that's hard. But now the Giants have lost 2 out of their last 3 games, and not beating Detroit, all of a sudden, it's just, dude, when you look at it right now, it really does become, got to reset the clock. You know, they're going to turn away from this loss, reset themselves. We'll see here tomorrow what happens in terms of total injuries. Looks like Wan'Dale Robinson is going to miss, maybe. I have to confirm that he could be missing all of the remainder of the season potentially. And by the way, just as a quick side note, Andy talked about this at the time of the draft. Loved, I started getting excited about Wan'Dale Robinson. He's shown some flashes of that. And Andy's biggest concern at the time was, boy, is he tiny. You worry about injuries. Ironically, I think concussions would have been top of the list there, right? Like, these wouldn't have been the types of injuries you wouldn't necessarily have been concerned about, but injuries nonetheless. So now you have to worry about what's going to happen with him. So for a team at 7-3, with all the injuries you're mentioning, now I think it's more about the high profile injuries that you suffered here. You're going to have an interesting conversation coming out of these next 4 straight games. What does it look like, right? What does it look like for the New York Football Giants over these next 4 games inside of the division? 2-2 would be very successful to me. But now you can't just look at Washington and say, okay, we'll go win those. There's a long way to go here. Thursday's the first and foremost, and we'll discuss that on tomorrow and on Wednesday's show. But just a rough one, man. Just a rough one from that standpoint. And a little piece of me is going back to talent evaluation as opposed to season expectation. And the damning part there is so much of the players you want to evaluate aren't going to be on the field.
At the end of the day, Adam, it was just a brutal game all around. You mentioned just bad offensively, bad defensively, bad coaching, injuries happen, and the rest of the division wins. It feels like this was a really, really bad day for the Giants. Good news on the plus side is you can shake this one off a little bit earlier and you get the game faster to you on Thanksgiving. I really wish the Giants weren't playing on Thanksgiving, Adam, because I just want to sit on the couch and like kind of flip through. Now I got to like actually focus on the game itself. But listen, maybe the short week benefits the Giants, not as much game planning going on, and maybe they can go into Dallas and sneak out a win.
We will have to wait and see. From a scheduling standpoint, we'll talk about this past game. We'll get injury updates tomorrow a little bit. We'll start to look at that Dallas game. That preview is going out on Wednesday morning. We're obviously not going to be you're not going to see us on Thursday morning. Enjoy the holiday. That's the intention here. And then we'll most likely come back in there on Friday and talk about that game. But listen, it's the holiday. It's the holiday week. We'll probably talk about some of those cliche things, like what are we thankful for around the New York Football Giants over the next couple of days. It was a bad one. It was a bad loss against what we think is a fairly bad team. Try to get past it. Try to turn the page here. And we will, of course, look to do so starting tomorrow. In the meantime, friends, you get over to YouTube, you subscribe to the channel. We continue to see our numbers growing over there. It really means the world to us. Get in on the conversations. We obviously appreciate that as well. And then get that podcast on wherever you get those podcast needs fulfilled. Until next time, friends, with a little bit more of a somber tone, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.